Something in your field of vision just rearranged itself, and you may not have consciously registered it yet. Maybe it was a sentence someone said that suddenly landed differently than it would have a month ago. Maybe it was waking up midweek, already knowing exactly what needed to change. Maybe you were staring at a decision you'd been avoiding, and out of nowhere, you saw precisely which part of it was fake. None of that is coincidence. Right now, the sky is doing something it rarely does. One planet is lining up with three others in the same short window, and that planet happens to be the one that governs how far you can see. This isn't a small, easily missed transit buried in the background of an ordinary week. It's the kind of configuration astrologers wait years to point a camera at. When your vantage point shifts, everything downstream of it shifts too. What you notice, what you'll keep tolerating, what finally looks small enough to let go of. You don't need to believe in fate for any of this to be useful to you. You just need to be someone whose focus has felt different lately. If that's you, keep watching, because what's forming above your head right now is genuinely rare, and it's speaking directly to how you build the rest of your life from here. Here's the architecture of it, in plain terms, without the jargon getting in the way. Jupiter is currently moving through the first degrees of Leo, the sign that rules visibility, self-expression, and how much room you're willing to take up in your own life. Jupiter just spent months in Cancer, which is a private, protective, inward sign. Moving into Leo is like stepping out of a room you'd been furnishing quietly and suddenly finding yourself on a stage you didn't audition for. That transition alone would be worth noticing. But normally, when Jupiter forms a major aspect to an outer planet, that's a single, isolated event, weeks away from the next one. This time is different. Within roughly a day and a half, Jupiter forms a trine to Neptune, an opposition to Pluto, and a sextile to Uranus, three separate relationships to three separate outer planets, arriving almost back to back. Astrologers don't see that kind of clustering often, because outer planets move so slowly that their aspects to faster-moving planets rarely stack this tightly. When they do, it tends to mark a hinge point, rather than an ordinary week, the kind of stretch people look back on months later and recognize as the moment something actually started, even if it looked unremarkable while it was happening. The timing matters too, and it's worth sitting with for a second instead of rushing past it. This window arrives right as the sky is closing out a long stretch of inward, protective, Cancer-flavored energy and preparing to step into something louder and more visible. You're not just getting three aspects at once, you're getting them at the exact hinge between a season built for retreating inward and a season built for stepping forward. That's not a small detail. It means whatever surfaces for you right now isn't meant to stay private for long. It's meant to be carried out into daylight, tested against other people, spoken out loud, instead of turned over quietly in your own head one more time. If you've spent the last few weeks in a more withdrawn, reflective mode than usual, that wasn't wasted time. It was preparation for exactly this kind of window, whether you knew it at the time or not. Think of the last few weeks as the quiet part of a performance, the part where the lights are still down and everyone is finding their marks. What's forming now is the moment the lights actually come up. Each of those three planets governs something distinct, and it helps to hold them separately before you try to feel them together. Neptune governs imagination, intuition, and the parts of you that know things before you can explain them in words. Pluto governs what you're gripping too tightly, control, survival patterns, structures you built for a reason that stopped applying a while ago. Uranus governs sudden clarity, the kind that shows up without warning and rearranges what you assumed was fixed and permanent. Jupiter touching all three planets in one window means expansion is being offered on every one of those fronts simultaneously. Your imagination becomes harder to dismiss, your grip gets tested, and your capacity for an unexpected opening gets amplified. That's a lot of structural weight moving through a short stretch of time, and it's worth naming clearly instead of speaking about it in vague terms. This also isn't happening in isolation. Uranus and Pluto have been building a working relationship with each other for months now, slowly loosening what felt permanently stuck, both in the collective and in individual lives. If you've been following any of that, you already know it's been a slow unlock rather than a sudden crash. The sky has been laying groundwork long before this particular window opened. What's forming now is less like a spark out of nowhere and more like a lock finally turning after the tumblers have quietly been aligning for a while. If you felt like you were circling the same realization for weeks without quite landing it, this is the window where it's allowed to land. Not because a planet is doing it to you, but because the pattern that's been building finally has enough pressure behind it to move somewhere. The first thing this window does is make your imagination harder to dismiss. Jupiter's trine to Neptune is the easiest of the three aspects to feel, because trines don't create friction, they create flow. Whatever you've quietly wanted, whatever idea you've filed under too much or not realistic for someone like me, gets a structural upgrade this week. Not because wanting something makes it appear out of nowhere, but because the part of your mind that filters ideas into possible and impossible is temporarily more generous than usual. Watch for a project, a move, or a version of your life that you dismissed months ago resurfacing with more detail than it had before. That added detail is the actual tell. Fantasies stay vague no matter how many times you replay them. Plans get specific, gain steps, start attaching themselves to real dates and real names. If the idea keeps returning with more shape each time you think about it, it has already stopped being a fantasy, whether you've admitted that to yourself or not. Maybe it's the creative project you keep opening in your head at odd hours and closing again before anyone else sees it. Maybe it's the move, the course, the different way of making a living that you've mentioned once, lightly, and then never brought up again out of embarrassment. This week, notice if that same idea shows up wearing more specific clothing than it used to, a rough timeline instead of a vague someday, a name attached instead of an anonymous maybe. That shift from vague to specific is Neptune's trine doing exactly what it does best. The second thing is less comfortable, and it's supposed to be. Jupiter's opposition to Pluto puts your instinct to control directly across the table from your instinct to grow, and asks which one is actually running the show right now. Oppositions don't resolve quietly. They make you choose, out loud, even if only to yourself in the middle of the night. Somewhere in your life this week, you are holding on to something with more force than the situation actually requires, a plan you refuse to adjust even as the evidence changes, a version of yourself you're defending purely out of habit, a relationship you're managing like a project instead of living inside of. This aspect doesn't remove that grip for you, and it won't hand you a clean resolution. It just makes the grip impossible to keep ignoring. The discomfort you might feel isn't a sign something has gone wrong. It's a sign you're finally standing close enough to see clearly what you've spent weeks or months carefully avoiding. That avoidance can be small and easy to miss. Rehearsing the same argument in your head instead of actually having it with the person involved, protecting a belief about your own limits that you never actually tested, keeping a routine exactly the way it is because changing it would mean admitting it stopped serving you a while back. This aspect has a way of putting that exact thing directly in your path this week, not as punishment, but because you're finally sturdy enough to look at it without it knocking you over. The third thing is the easiest door in the whole configuration, and it's also the one most people miss entirely. Jupiter's sextile to Uranus is an offer, not a demand, and offers are quiet by nature. Sextiles open a gap and then simply wait to see if you'll walk through it. This week, that might look like a conversation you almost didn't have, an option you almost dismissed as too random or too small to matter, or an odd little coincidence that puts a name, a place, or an idea directly in front of you without any obvious reason why. Nothing about this aspect forces your hand. If you ignore the opening, it closes quietly, and you'll likely never even notice it was there to begin with. If you take it, even in a small, ordinary-looking way, it tends to move faster than you'd expect once you've said yes. Uranus rewards the person who commits before they've fully thought the whole thing through, which is uncomfortable advice, but it's honest. Watch specifically for something that arrives from slightly outside your usual circle this week. A message from someone you haven't spoken to in a while, a stray comment in a group chat, a recommendation from a stranger that turns out to matter more than it should. Uranus rarely announces itself through the people and channels you already pay close attention to. It tends to come in sideways, through the periphery, which is exactly why it's so easy to miss if you're only watching the center of your own life. There's one more detail worth knowing, because it's the kind of thing that separates a loosely worded prediction from something you can actually verify. All three of these aspects are forming at close to the same degree. Jupiter, Neptune, Pluto, and Uranus are each sitting within about a single degree of each other, across their respective signs as this window peaks. In astrology, a tighter degree match generally means a stronger, more exact expression of the aspect, rather than a loose background hum of influence. This isn't a case of planets vaguely in the same general area of the sky. It's closer to four separate instruments, hitting the same precise note within moments of each other. That precision is part of why this window reads as unusually concentrated compared to an average week, and it's the kind of detail you can check yourself on any ephemeris if you want the numbers, instead of just the feeling. It's a small thing, but it's the difference between a horoscope that asks you to take its word for it and one that hands you the coordinates. Individually, none of these three aspects would be dramatic enough to build an entire video around. A single trine to Neptune is pleasant and easy to enjoy. A single opposition to Pluto is intense but familiar, the kind of tension most people have felt before. A single sextile to Uranus is a nice surprise, and not much more than that. What makes this particular window different is that all three are active on the same short timeline, which means Jupiter isn't just touching one part of your life. It's touching your imagination, your grip, and your openness to sudden change, all at once, the way a blueprint gets revised on three separate floors of the same building simultaneously. That's the actual reason this stretch of days feels bigger than an ordinary week. And it's worth trusting that instinct rather than talking yourself out of it. It isn't one door opening. It's three, positioned close enough together that walking through one makes the other two considerably easier to see and easier to walk through as well. You don't need Leo placements for this to reach you. And you don't need to know your exact birth chart down to the degree for it to be relevant to your week. Jupiter's effect here is about perspective more than precision. This is a transit about vision itself, and vision touches everyone, regardless of where your personal planets happen to sit on the wheel. That said, if you already know you have placements near the early degrees of Leo, Aquarius, Taurus, or Scorpio, expect the effect to land sharper and more specifically in a particular area of your life, whether that's identity, relationships, work, or home. For everyone else, the signs are still recognizable if you know what to watch for. A thought that keeps returning uninvited at inconvenient moments. An old idea that resurfaces with new, unfamiliar detail attached to it. A conversation that quietly reframes something you had assumed was already settled. You'll likely know this window is active because something you'd normally scroll straight past will suddenly hold your attention for a second longer than it should. It might be a headline, a stranger's comment, a photo of a place you've never been that suddenly feels oddly specific to you. Pay attention to repetition more than intensity. If the same theme keeps tapping you on the shoulder in different forms across a few days, that's a stronger signal than any single dramatic moment could be. Here's the part almost nobody tells you about what a sign from the sky actually is. It's not a directive, and it was never meant to be one. The sky isn't handing you a decision that's already been made on your behalf. It's making a decision easier to see clearly than it usually is, stripping away some of the noise that normally sits between you and your own judgment. Being positioned to notice something is not the same as being exempt from choosing what to do about it afterward. That's really what chosen means in a moment like this. Not that the outcome is guaranteed, not that the work disappears, but that the fog clears just long enough for you to see the actual shape of your options, instead of the version you've been telling yourself out of fear, exhaustion, or plain habit. What you do with that clarity is still entirely yours to decide, start to finish. The sky opens the door and holds it for a while. It has never once walked through it on anyone's behalf. So here's what actually shifts if you engage with this window instead of scrolling straight past it the way you might on an ordinary day. The idea you've been quietly dismissing gets 15 honest minutes of your attention instead of 0. The thing you've been gripping gets one small, deliberate loosening, not abandoned outright, just held with slightly less force than you've been holding it with for weeks. The opening that shows up, however small or strange it looks on the surface, gets an honest yes instead of a reflexive, automatic no. None of that requires a dramatic overhaul of your entire life by Friday. It requires noticing once, at roughly the right moment, and choosing even slightly differently than you would have on autopilot. That's genuinely all a transit like this is asking of you. It doesn't do the work for you, and it was never going to. It just makes the work visible enough that skipping it starts to feel like a conscious choice too, rather than something that simply happened to you by default. Think of it less like a lightning bolt and more like someone finally turning the lights on in a room you'd been navigating from memory. Nothing in the room changed. You can just see the furniture now, which means bumping into it stops being an accident. If any part of this landed for you, if you recognize the thought that keeps circling back, or the grip you've been white-knuckling without quite admitting it, or the small opening you almost talked yourself out of taking, say which one, in your own words, down in the comments. Not for luck, and not because typing it out changes anything on its own by magic. Naming a thing out loud is usually the first honest step toward actually doing something real about it, and this particular window tends to reward honesty over performance every single time, not the other way around. If you're not sure which of the three you're feeling most, that's fine too. Say that instead. Uncertainty named honestly is still more useful than a confident answer you talked yourself into just to have something to post. You weren't chosen because you're special in some way that exempts you from the ordinary work of building a life. You were chosen because you're paying attention at the exact moment attention happens to be worth the most. That's rarer than it sounds. Most people will let this week pass the same way they let most weeks pass, unnoticed, unexamined, filed away as ordinary before it even finished happening. You're not most people right now, not because of anything mystical about who you are, but simply because you stayed until the end of this. What you do with it next is, as always, entirely up to you.